learners. Welcome to this session. We are going to continue with our discussion in the previous session on tribal identity in the modern world. So, continuing that discussion, in the previous session, we had discussed tribal identity, individual and community. We had also discussed the second characteristic, that was tribal identity and colonialism. In this session, we will continue with the third aspect of tribal identity crisis, which is tribal identity and environment. In the age of globalization, being geographically mobile is seen as an advantage, while tribal communities often see their immediate surrounding environment as an important constituent of their identity. Amita Bhavishkar says, hills, trees, stones are imbued with spiritual power and actively intervene in people's life at the same time. The supernatural world of the spirits is also the extension of the social world of the lineage, populated as it is by the invisible presence of ancestor guardians and evil spirits, that is, enemies of the lineage, who sometimes assume the human form of Dakkans and possess married women. This Amita Bhavishkar describes in her book in the year 2001 on page number 161. Modern knowledge systems categorize tribal beliefs as superstitions, which have to be replaced by scientific knowledge. However, these beliefs are an important part of the tribal identity. Why? Because number one, they attribute meanings to their social and physical environment, and number two, these meanings are shared among all members of the community and thus unite the community. And thirdly, these shared meanings are the basis for any form of collective behavior. Community rituals and social practices are done based on these commonly held meanings. Similarly, protests and violence ensues when others act in violations of these values. Tribal relationship with the forest is not entirely supernatural. Many of the food items and energy resources are obtained from the forests. Now we will discuss the fourth aspect, that is tribal identity and Christianity. Christianity was adopted by the northeastern tribes, while many other Indian tribes did not convert to the faith. Converting to Christianity provided tribes opportunity to be part of the global religious system and gave them a new identity. Christian schools and colleges provided modern education, which exposed them to modern ideologies and value systems. It is also observed that tribes that have converted have relatively higher literacy rate than others. The increased educational opportunities led to many changes, like modern political leaders, then tribal scholars and intellectuals who could articulate tribal viewpoints and demands. It was not accidental that the first set of modern political leaders in Chota Nagpur, present-day Jharkhand, mainly came from the Christian community. The new political leadership was different from the traditional leaders. The traditional tribal leaders acquired their legitimacy from religious sources. Often traditional leaders got their direction for political actions from spirits and gods, while the new leaders knew modern forms of political activity. They were aware of need for democratic and representative governance, elections, voting and party system. They understood the importance of advocating tribal demands and getting concessions from the government to help tribal communities. Christianity became an important factor in fusing disparate tribal groups into larger tribal communities. According to Sanjeev Barua, the single most important development that made the imagining of Nagas as a collective group was their conversion to Christianity. Today, Christianity is an essential part of Naga identity. The Christian identity which marks the Nagas, apart from the mostly Hindu and Muslim population of the Indian heartland has been partly an act of cultural resistance that parallel the political and armed resistance. Christian principles often differed with tribal beliefs and value systems. They discouraged the widespread beliefs of tribes in witchcraft and black magic. The tribal youth hostels were looked upon as sinful and evil. The church and the priests became the center of Christian tribal life. In this way, Christian belief replaced traditional beliefs. Christian missionaries played an important role in the standardization of tribal languages. A number of tribal languages had no script. Each language had significant linguistic differences even within it, which made it difficult for them to communicate with different communities within one language group. The local tribal languages were standardized. Often the Roman alphabet along with accent was used to write the language. Dictionaries of the local languages were compiled. Prayer services were translated into the tribal language. Tribal languages became part of the identity of the tribes. Very relevant, a former missionary himself, criticized the Christian missionaries for converting the tribes. He was critical of the imposition of Christian morals and values which were contrary to tribal values. Now, the fifth characteristic of tribal identity is tribal identity and Hinduism. Tribals have always been in contact with Hindu civilization. In fact, Gurye, a prominent sociologist, called Indian tribes backward Hindus. Others have disputed this contention by pointing out that there are significant differences between the Hindus and the tribal religions. It is difficult to determine this issue conclusively. Why? Because of the following reasons. First is that Hindu religion does not have any set of criteria to determine an individual's membership into the religion. There is no common ritual, prayers or belief system which all Hindus adhere to. Secondly, it does not have any church or an ummah whose membership can identify the individual as a member of a particular religious group. And thirdly, the diversity in tribal religions make the process of identifying individual tribes who are significantly Hinduized and who are not, that is extremely difficult. Mutually influencing interaction between the tribes and the Hindu civilization existed from early times. Historians say that Indian civilization is itself a product of a series of accreditation of tribes at different times. Bete in 2004 quotes Kosambi, who says that the entire course of Indian history shows tribal elements being fused into the general society. And this phenomenon, which lies at the foundation of the most striking Indian feature, namely caste, is also great basic fact of ancient Indian history. A known example of the transformation of a tribe into a caste is the Ahoms of Assam, who were originally from outside India and after a length of time become a fully integrated caste group within the Hindu caste system. Similarly, the Khasi, regarded as a tribe, has certainly Hindu features. The process got accelerated with the colonial period, with greater movement of people around the country. Increased contact led to increased interaction between tribes and Hindus. Changes were observed in many tribal communities. Especially the Todas of Nilgiri Hills in Tamil Nadu is an example. They are substantially influenced by the Dravidian Hinduism, which immigrants from other parts of South India have brought with them. Pictorial representation of Hindu gods and goddesses have found an honorable place in many Toda households. However, there has not always been a decline in the indigenous tribal rituals. Both the ritual systems are practiced with fervor and enthusiasm. Walker in 1986 says that the Todas has accepted the efficacy of two parallel ritual systems, his own and that of popular South Indian Hinduism. Unlike Christianity, Hinduism did not demand that the tribes completely stop their former worship practices. The tribal gods and worship systems were integrated into the Hindu belief systems at the local level. The tribes were given a position in the caste system, which often was low, and if they wanted to improve the status, they had to Sanskritize. They had to adopt the values, beliefs, lifestyles of the dominant community. The dominant caste was most often a twice-born caste, that is, Brahmin, Kshatriya, or Vaishya. They had to stop eating beef and pork, both of which were sources of ritual pollution. Women were stopped from doing work outside the house and restriction put on their movements. The sixth aspect is tribal identity and industrialization. Industrialization and urbanization are two important features of modern society. Traditional values and institutions undergo major changes when industrialization and urbanization takes place. In some situations, traditional institution gets strengthened, and in other situations, it gets weakened. The tribes in the Chota Nagpur area experienced industrialization and urbanizations when industries were set up in the mineral-rich areas. However, due to the lack of education, the tribes could not get good jobs in the industries. Non-tribal outsiders got the lucrative jobs, while the lowly paid menial jobs were given to the tribes. State and nation building. The Indian state that replaced the British colonial state was a liberal, democratic and modern state. One of the main tasks of the state was nation building. The political leaders felt that loyalties of people were predominantly with their own community and not to the nation state. In order to make a nation, it is important that terminal loyalties of its citizens lie in the nation state. At the same time, it was realized that a large number of people experienced inequality and discrimination because they belonged to certain groups, that is, scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Ending the discrimination and integrating communities into the mainstream was seen as an important goal for independent India. The leading ideas of the political leadership after independence can be summarized under the following heading: sovereignty, unity, order, a strong state, secularism, democracy and parliamentary, economic self-sufficiency, and the need for social and economic reform. A key principle was that no secessionist movement would be entertained and would be smashed with armed force if necessary. The British administered the largely tribal areas by designating them as partially excluded areas and excluded areas, which meant less of British administration and more of self-governance. When the British exited from India, the princely states were given option whether to join the Indian Union or the newly created states of Pakistan or remain independent. Princely states, depending on their population and territorial position, were integrated with the Indian Union. Many tribal secessionists claimed that the option to remain independent was available to them, and tribal leaders had opted out to remain independent. But these claims are not recognized by the Indian government. Rebellions by tribes have been dealt with the help of armed forces. The Indian government's response to tribal demands for increased self-governance has been in the following ways: create new states when feasible within the Indian states, then create autonomous councils with limited powers within the existing states. The plain tribes of Assam Bodo have got a Bodo Autonomous Council which governs the Bodo dominated areas, and the extension of Panchayat Raj system to tribal areas, that is PISA, with additional powers and responsibilities. The aim of these structures is to satisfy demands for greater control of the resources and protecting their unique lifestyle. Tribal identity has been significantly influenced by the post-independence politics. Some of the significant changes have been: number one, new identities have been created by the tribal communities by merging previously separate tribes. Secondly, political mobilization by one community has led to counter mobilization by the other community and vice versa. At times, these mobilizations have led to violent conflicts, sharpening tribal identities. A number of states were created in the Northeast in response of tribal movements for separate states. In some cases, the formation of a new state has satisfied the demands of the dominant community, while minorities are unsatisfied. In other cases, the demands for statehood have been only partially met. For example, it was after a long struggle that the demand for Jharkhand has been accepted, and it consists of areas belonging only to Bihar. Areas in West Bengal and Orissa, which are tribal dominated, have not been included in Jharkhand. The idea of nationalism and democracy support homogenizing of cultures. Often communities with different culture are seen as threat to the majority community. Now the question arises, are tribes nations? T.K. Owen surveys the popular academic opinion on tribal nationalism. Academicians prefer to use terms like subnational movements, that is by N.K. Bose, and subnational and proto-national movements by Roy Burman to describe tribal aspirations for autonomy. Tribes are denied the right of being nations and always seen as being part of the larger nation. Omans argues that tribes, especially the larger ones, have fulfilled the criteria for being called a nation and should be seen as such. Jaganpati points out that the term tribe itself is a nomenclature introduced by colonialists. He points out that tribes were earlier treated like nations before they were subdued and made part of the colonial empire. Then, tribal reaction to loss of identity and change. Tribal communities have been exposed to a large attack on their culture and identity. The response has been diverse and observable at different levels. Needless to say, there is clash between the tribal worldview and the modern view, which when played out in an unequal condition has led to widespread unrest and violence. B.K. Roy Burman identifies various parameters as the causes for tribal unrest. First, he says, response to threats of privacy of habitats. Secondly, response to threats to access and control of resources. Response to disruption of traditional roles in the total interaction setup. Fourth, search for new meanings of the relationship between man and nature. Fifth, search for new meanings of the relationship between individuals and society. And sixth is a search for new frontiers of identity. Seventh is a search for a more satisfactory system of control of resources. And eighth is the search for more satisfactory system of organization of community power at all levels. Now talking about deviant behavior at the individual and group level, increase in deviant behavior among the tribes have been observed in the communities in India. In some cases, deviant behavior is observed in the many ways, like one is increase in committing theft and robberies. Tribes that have faced rapid change in their traditional roles and facing problems of survival have often taken to committing thefts and robberies. In traditional tribal societies, stealing was improper, but due to value changes, tribes began to commit these crimes. B.K. Roy Burman gives an example of the Banjaras who rendered commissariat services to the armies in the Middle Ages became redundant after the railways and modern communication technologies arrived. Many of them, unable to adapt to the new situation, took to crime. R.C. Verma mentions how British government and Rajput rulers in Rajasthan declared the entire Meena tribe as notified criminal tribes. While some tribesmen may have been participating in criminal behavior, just like members of any community, more or less, the whole tribe was declared as criminal tribe in order to humiliate the community. Here again, it was the loss of their kingdoms that the Meenas engaged in the criminal behavior. Similarly, cases of tribes indulging in theft, robberies and dacoit have been reported in other areas. James Scott, in his influential book, calls these acts of banditry as a form of social protest against the powerful that dispossess them of their property. Alcoholism. It is observed that tribal men and women are increasingly becoming addicted to alcohol. There always existed in many tribes the habit of drinking traditional drinks socially. The consumption of these drinks was controlled by the community. Tribes removed from their traditional settings have increasingly become alcoholics. The prevalence of alcoholism is higher in the communities which were displaced and not successfully rehabilitated. Disintegration and disappearance of tribal communities is always one of the consequences. Revivalism of language and culture. The process of nation building is centered on the majority culture and language. The majority language is often made the official language. The majority community then has numerous advantages over members of other communities. According to Charles Taylor, the minorities have three basic options. They can accept integration into the majority culture, although perhaps attempts to renegotiate the terms of integration. They can seek the sorts of rights and powers of self-government needed to maintain their own societal culture, that is to create their own economic, political and educational institutions in their own language, that is they can engage in their own form of competing nation building. They can accept permanent marginalization. It is in reaction to this marginalization that tribes have begun to see themselves as being separate from the others, that is the mainstream. They insist that they can be identified by their membership in the tribe, that is the Adivasis, and that their identity may be subsumed by the larger regional and national identity, which should not be subsumed. They claim that they are the indigenous people of the territory they reside and therefore they have the first right over the natural resources. Thus, there is use of Adivasi identity imposed on them by others to further their claims to the state, and this is reported by Kaka in the year 1999. Any attempt by the so-called mainstream at the government level and the civil society level to foster integration is responded with even more aggressive declarations of being different from mainstream. There have been a significant movement towards revival of past religious practices of the tribes. Hinduized tribes have been asked by their leaders to again start eating beef, which was prohibited by the Hindu community. Some tribes which had converted to Christianity have also taken up their tribal beliefs and rejected Christian beliefs. There is also a significant process of tribalization of Christian rituals and practices under the broad term of indigenization. Now talking about fusion and fission in tribes. Modernization and democracy often leads to changes in social identity of people. A number of originally distinct tribes have come together to form larger federation to form new tribal union. But these processes are not without controversy and acrimony. Datta Ray in the year 1989 describes the process of naming and renaming of tribes by tribes themselves and by outsiders. He gives an example of Thadao and Cookies. Many in these tribes feel that they are distinct from each other, while others feel that they are one and the same. There is even a denial of the name of the tribe by claiming that the term Thadal is not the name of the tribe but of their ancestors. Similarly, there are attempts in Assam to change the name of the tribe by the tribes themselves as they feel that the name is derogatory and given by others. Hope you've understood the various issues that causes tribal unrest. Now we are at the end of this session and we will just sum up. Tribal political and social identity are important issues in the future. Often the issue is seen as limited to one or two issues, that is political autonomy, displacement and ecology. As we have seen, tribal identity problems are often much larger than these issues. The situation is also dynamic. The society and the tribal population are undergoing numerous changes, consciously or unconsciously. Thus, the problem of identity is related to social and cultural change. It is different type of modernity which has to emerge in the tribal communities. In democratic societies, these problems cannot be resolved through authoritarian means, and participatory ways have to be found to resolve these issues. Social workers are deeply engaged in the society and its different processes. With this, we come to the end of the session. Thank you for listening to the video. Keep watching the videos in order to have a better understanding of the course. Thank you once again.